The envelope hit my kitchen counter with a soft thud, but the sound it made inside my chest was anything like soft. I stood there in my bathrobe, coffee in hand, staring at my son's handwriting on the front. Neat, deliberate, like he'd taken his time with it. I almost smiled, thought maybe he'd finally come around. Maybe this was an apology. Maybe this was him saying, "Dad, I was wrong. Come to the wedding." I tore it open. Inside was a printed invoice, itemized, professional looking, with my son's name at the top as the event coordinator and mine at the bottom under responsible party. The total? $231,000. And at the very bottom, handwritten in blue ink, "Be grateful you even get to contribute. It's the least you can do." I set my coffee down very slowly because I knew if I didn't, I was going to throw it through a window. My name is Robert Callahan. I am 61 years old. I live in a modest but well-kept house in Charlotte, North Carolina. The kind of house where the porch light stays on even when nobody's coming home. I spent 34 years working in commercial real estate, not the flashy kind you see on TV, but the real kind. Leases, zoning, negotiations that stretched across months. I built something solid out of nothing, the way men of my generation were taught to do, quietly, without applause. My wife, Donna, passed away 11 years ago. Breast cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much warning and doesn't take requests. After she died, I raised our son, Derek, alone. He was 19 when we lost her, old enough to grieve like a man, young enough to still need his father more than he'd ever admit. I gave Derek everything I had, not just money, though I gave plenty of that too. I gave him time, attention. I drove 4 hours to watch him graduate college. I co-signed his first apartment lease. I gave him a down payment for his condo when he was 27. I never asked for any of it back because that's not why I gave it. I gave it because he was my son, and that was supposed to mean something. Apparently, it only meant something to one of us. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers. But I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these stories matter. Hit that subscribe button before we go any further. Now, where were we? Right, the invoice. Let me back up about 8 months, because this thing didn't start with a piece of paper. It started with a phone call, the kind that feels normal at first, the kind where you're smiling before you even realize the knife is already in the conversation. Derek called me on a Tuesday evening. I was watching a game, half asleep in my recliner the way retired men are legally allowed to do. He sounded happy, light. He said, "Dad, I've got news. You're getting married," I said, because I'd met his girlfriend, Tiffany, twice, and both times she'd looked at him like she was mentally redecorating him. He laughed. "Yeah, we got engaged last weekend." Popped the question at that rooftop restaurant in Uptown. I told him congratulations. I meant it, despite everything that was quietly wrong between us, the growing distance, the missed calls, the way holidays had become polite performances. I meant it. I wanted my son to be happy. That part was never complicated for me. "We're thinking a big wedding," he said. "Tiffany has a lot of family. Her parents have a lot of friends. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was, but I said sure. "We're looking at venues," he continued. "There's this place in Asheville. Beautiful. Outdoor ceremony, indoor reception, the works." "Sounds expensive," I said lightly. There was a pause. Not long. Just long enough. "We were hoping you could help with that, Dad." And I said, "God help me." I said, "Of course. Whatever I can do." That sentence would cost me more than I ever imagined. Not in money, in dignity. Over the next 2 months, Derek and Tiffany sent me a shared Google document, a wedding budget spreadsheet. I'm a real estate man. I know spreadsheets. I've reviewed budgets worth tens of millions of dollars. but I had never in my life seen a document that made my twitch the way this one did. Venue rental, $42,000. Catering per head for 300 guests, $38,000. Photography and videography, $18,500. Floral arrangements, $14,200. Live band, $11,000. Dress, $8,400. Suits, $6,200. Honeymoon in the Maldives, $31,000. Miscellaneous, $61,700. The miscellaneous category alone was larger than most people's annual salaries. I asked Derek what exactly was miscellaneous about $61,700. He said, Tiffany's mom has a list. Tiffany's mom had a list. Of course she did. Now, I want to be very clear about something. I was not opposed to contributing to my son's wedding. Not at all. What bothered me, what started a slow, quiet fire somewhere behind my ribs, was that nobody asked me what I could comfortably give. They just sent me a document with a total and my name in one of the cells under funding source, paternal contribution. My assigned share was $231,000. Not half, not a third. $231,000, which, if you're doing the math at home, is more than the total budget I just read you. That's because they'd already revised the budget upward and apparently hadn't updated all the cells. I didn't say anything yet. I just started paying attention. I called Derek and said, Son, I want to talk about this budget. He sighed, the sigh of a man who has already decided the conversation will be inconvenient. What about it? It's a lot of money, I said. I want to understand what Tiffany's family is contributing. Another pause. This one longer. They're contributing in other ways, he said. What ways? Emotional support, planning. Her mother's been working on this for months. I almost laughed. I said, Derek, her mother's emotional labor is worth $231,000 to you. His voice went cold the way it did sometimes, a trick he'd never learned from me. So I always assumed he'd learned it from somewhere else. Dad, we didn't call to negotiate. We called because we thought you'd want to be part of this. I do want to be part of this, I said. I'd also like to actually be at this. Of course you'll be there, he said. And he said it in a tone that suggested the subject was closed. It was not closed. It was just moved somewhere I couldn't see it yet. I consulted my financial advisor, a careful man named Gerald, who had been managing my retirement portfolio for 16 years and who had the bedside manner of a very calm, very expensive accountant. Gerald looked at the spreadsheet and then looked at me over his reading glasses and said, Robert, this would represent about 60% of your liquid assets. I know. You understand that at 61, with no secondary income, this would significantly impact your... I know, Gerald. He was quiet for a moment. Is this what you want to do? No, I said, but I'm trying to figure out how much of it is what I should do. Gerald put the papers down and said something I've thought about many times since. He said, there's a difference between a father who gives and a father who's taken from. Make sure you know which one you're being. I drove home and sat in Donna's old chair. I'd kept it in the corner of the living room because sometimes a man needs to feel like someone is still in the room with him. And I thought about that for a long time. 3 weeks later, Derek called again. Dad, we've put a deposit on the Asheville venue. We assumed you were on board. I sat up straight. You put a deposit down before we agreed on anything? We couldn't wait. The date was going to be taken. How much was the deposit? $22,000. We put it on Tiffany's mom's card. But obviously that comes back to you. Obviously. As if the laws of the universe had been quietly amended to include a clause that said whatever Tiffany's mother spent was mine to reimburse. I said very carefully, Derek, I haven't agreed to any specific amount yet. Dad, that tone again. Come on. You said you'd help. I said whatever I could do. I didn't say $231,000. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard since Donna died. And then he said something that I will probably hear for the rest of my life. You know what your problem is? You're so focused on money that you can't see what this means to me. This is my wedding. This is the most important day of my life. And you're nickel and diming it like some kind of... He stopped himself. But not soon enough. Like some kind of what? I asked. Nothing. Forget it. No, finish the sentence. He didn't. He said he had to go, and he'd talk to me later. And he hung up. And I sat in Donna's chair, and I thought about what the end of that sentence probably was. Like some kind of stranger. Like some kind of obstacle. Like some kind of ATM that's running low. I want you to pause here for just one moment. If this story is speaking to something you felt, if you've ever given and still felt invisible, I want you to comment below. Just say, I see you, Robert. Because sometimes the most powerful thing is just knowing someone else has been in that chair. And while you're here, please subscribe. Every single subscriber tells the algorithm that real human stories matter. Okay, let's keep going. A month passed. Derek and I didn't speak much. Short texts. One-word replies. The kind of communication that looks like a relationship if you squint hard enough. Then on a Thursday morning, I got an email. Not a call. An email. It was from Tiffany CCing Derek. It was titled, Wedding Logistics, Important Update. Inside, very politely, very professionally, it explained that after much discussion, they had decided that the ceremony and reception would be intimate family affairs, and that they were streamlining the guest list to ensure the most meaningful experience. It said that given recent tensions, they felt it would be best for the energy of the day if I did not attend. Then it said, and I'm going to read this to you exactly as I remember it, we still very much appreciate your financial support in making Derek's dream wedding reality. And we know Donna would have wanted you to do this for him. They used my dead wife's name to guilt me into funding a wedding I wasn't invited to. They invoked Donna. I closed my laptop. I walked to the kitchen. I made a cup of tea, something Donna used to do when she needed to think. And I stood at the window looking at my backyard for maybe 15 minutes. The bird feeder needed refilling. I thought about that. I focused on that. The bird feeder. Because if I thought about the email, I was going to do something I couldn't undo. Then the envelope arrived. The invoice. The $231,000 bill. With a handwritten note at the bottom. Be grateful you even get to contribute. And that was the moment the old Robert Callahan, the patient one, the forgiving one, the one who kept the porch light on, stepped quietly to the side. And a different Robert stepped forward. The one who spent 34 years in real estate. The one who knew contracts. The one who knew exactly what verbal agreement meant and exactly what it didn't. I picked up my phone and I called Gerald. Gerald, I said, I need you to do something for me. Now here's where it gets interesting. What Derek didn't know, what neither he nor Tiffany's mother with her very long and very expensive list knew, was that 2 years earlier, I had quietly restructured a significant portion of my assets. Property I owned outright. A commercial building I'd held for 20 years in Concord, North Carolina, that I transferred into an LLC. Not for tax evasion, not for anything dramatic. Just smart estate planning that Gerald had recommended. Move the assets. Protect them. Give yourself options. The LLC was named after a street in the neighborhood where Donna and I had our first apartment. Maple Ridge Holdings. Nobody in Derek's life knew it existed. Why would they? I never talked about it because it never came up. I was just a retired man in Charlotte with a house and a pension, as far as anyone could see. Derek had been operating under the assumption that I had roughly $380,000 in liquid savings, which I did. What he hadn't accounted for was that the property in Maple Ridge Holdings, now after 20 years of appreciation in one of the fastest-growing markets in the Southeast, was worth considerably more than $380,000. But that's not the point. The point is what I did next. I did not reply to the email. I did not call Derek. I did not send a letter. I did not yell or cry or show up at his door like a man who'd lost his dignity. I smiled, and I made one quiet call. That call was to a woman named Patricia Owens. Patricia was a real estate attorney I'd worked with for 15 years, sharp, methodical, absolutely no nonsense in the way that only women who've spent decades in a male-dominated industry can be. I explained the situation. I read her the invoice. I told her about the email. I told her about Tiffany's mother's $22,000 deposit. Patricia listened to all of it. Then she said, "They sent you an actual invoice?" "Yes." "Itemized?" "Yes." "And you have documentation of every communication, every text, every email, the spreadsheet with my name in it?" There was a pause. And then Patricia said, in a tone that suggested she was trying very hard not to laugh, "Robert, do you know what an invoice is legally? It's a request for payment based on goods or services rendered." I said, "Correct. And do you know what you have to do with an invoice that you did not agree to, did not contract for, and were not consulted on before it was created?" "Nothing," I said. "Absolutely nothing," she confirmed. "But here's what's more interesting. They claimed in writing that you were funding this event. That means they've been telling vendors, possibly signing contracts, possibly taking out credit in arrangements that referenced your expected contribution. And if I don't contribute, then every vendor they've overcommitted to is their problem, legally, morally, and financially." I leaned back in my chair. "What about the deposit Tiffany's mother paid? Did you ask her to pay it? Did you sign anything? Did you verbally commit to reimbursing her?" "No." "Then that's a gift from a mother to her daughter. A generous one, but not your debt." I thanked Patricia and told her I might need her again. She said she'd keep her schedule flexible. Then I called my oldest friend in the world, a man named Eddie Boateng, who I'd known since we were both 22-year-old rookies at a real estate firm in Greensboro and who now, 3 decades later, ran one of the most prominent event PR firms in the Southeast. Eddie knew people. More importantly, Eddie knew people who knew people. "I need a favor," I said. "You only call me when you need a favor," he said. "That's because you're only useful when I need a favor." He laughed. "What is it?" I told him about Derek's wedding, the venue in Asheville, the budget, the guest list of 300. Eddie went quiet in the thoughtful way he had. Then he said, "You want to call someone at the venue?" "I want you to find out," I said carefully, "whether the venue has been properly contracted, whether the deposits are secure, whether the vendors are all locked in. I want to know exactly how stable this event is." Eddie made a sound. "Robert, I'm not going to do anything wrong," I said. "I just want information. A man should know the shape of the situation he's in." I was disinvited from my own son's wedding, Eddie." A long pause. "I'll make some calls." What Eddie found out was not what I expected, and I say that as a man who had already expected quite a lot. The Asheville venue, a beautiful property called Ridgeline Estate, had indeed been booked. A $22,000 deposit paid. But the contract, which Eddie's contact there shared with him in the spirit of a long-standing professional relationship, listed the financial guarantor of the event as one Robert J. Callahan of Charlotte, North Carolina. My name on a contract that I had never signed. I called Patricia. "Can they do that?" I asked. "They should not have done that," she said. "That's fraud. Even if it's family, fraud doesn't take a family discount, Robert." I sat with that for a very long time, because here is where a father's heart and a businessman's mind have to negotiate with each other. I had not wanted to destroy my son. I had not even wanted to punish him, not really. What I'd wanted from the very beginning, was to be treated like a person, like a father, like someone whose presence at his own son's wedding was worth more than his checkbook. They had made a different choice, so I made mine. Here's the part of the story where I want you to really pay attention, because this is where the ordinary becomes something else entirely. I called the venue. Professionally, calmly, I introduced myself as Robert Callahan and said I was calling to clarify my financial relationship with a booking made under the name Derek Callahan. The event coordinator, a very pleasant woman who had clearly never been in the middle of a family catastrophe before and was about to be, pulled up the file. Yes, Mr. Callahan, you're listed as the primary funding guarantor. I see, I said. Can you tell me, when was that designation made? She told me. It was 3 weeks after Derek, and I had our tense phone call, after I'd said I hadn't agreed to any specific amount. They'd listed me as guarantor anyway. I'd like to formally notify you, I said, that I was not consulted before being listed in that capacity. I did not sign any agreement, and I will not be responsible for any financial obligations associated with this event. I'd recommend you verify your payment security with the actual parties to the contract. The silence on the other end was the sound of someone realizing that a $22,000 deposit was about to become a very large problem. Sir, she said, the contract was executed without my knowledge or consent. I said pleasantly. I'd suggest you speak with your legal team. I'm going to speak with mine. I hung up and made myself a sandwich because I hadn't eaten, and revenge, it turns out, works better on a full stomach. Now, and here's where you need to buckle in, because this is the part one didn't see coming either. And I'm the one who lived it. 2 days later, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. An Asheville area code. I almost didn't answer. I'm glad I did. The voice on the other end was a woman. Older. Careful. She introduced herself as Helen, Tiffany's aunt. Mr. Callahan, she said, I'm sorry to call you out of nowhere. I got your number from someone at the venue who thought you should probably know some things. What things? I said. She exhaled. I love my niece. I want you to know that first. But I've been watching this situation develop for months, and I have a conscience, so here I am. Helen then told me something that rearranged the entire picture. Tiffany's mother, the woman with the list, had a different relationship with money than she'd presented to Derek. Specifically, she'd been quietly negotiating with several of the vendors to receive what Helen called referral fees. Kickbacks in plain English. The florist, the caterer, the photographer. Several of them were Tiffany's mother's business associates, and she had arranged for a portion of the wedding spend to come back to her privately, which is why the miscellaneous budget was $61,700, which is why every vendor recommendation came with a price tag that nobody questioned, because nobody knew to question it. The $231,000 wasn't just for a wedding. A significant portion of it was for Tiffany's mother's quiet little side arrangement. I said, Helen, do you have any documentation of this? I have emails, she said. I have emails because she accidentally CC'd me on one of them 6 months ago and never realized it. I've been sitting on it ever since, trying to figure out what to do. Forward them to me, I said. Please. She did. Within the hour, I called Patricia. Here is what happened next, and the order happened, because I want you to feel the weight of each moment. Patricia reviewed the emails. She confirmed that what Tiffany's mother had done constituted, at minimum, undisclosed financial conflicts of interest, and depending on how the vendors had represented themselves, potentially consumer fraud. Patricia sent a very calm, very detailed letter to Tiffany's mother's attorney. Because yes, a woman running a wedding vendor kickback scheme has an attorney on retainer, laying out what we knew, what we had documentation of, and what our expectations were. Tiffany's mother called Tiffany. Tiffany called Derek. Derek called me. It was the first time he'd called me in 6 weeks. His voice, when I answered, did not sound like the cold, dismissive voice from our previous conversations. It sounded like the voice of a 30-year-old man who has just discovered that the floor is not where he thought it was. "Dad," he said. "Derek, Dad, I stopped. Started again. Is it true? About Tiffany's mom?" "I believe so," I said. "Yes." A long, terrible silence. "I didn't know," he said. "I know you didn't. The $231,000 was never mine to pay, Derek. Not because I didn't love you, but because you excluded me from your wedding and then sent me a bill. Those two things don't go together. Not in any world I recognize." He was quiet. And then, and this is the moment I will carry with me for the rest of my life, I heard him crying, not sobbing, just that quiet, ragged breathing of a man who has finally run out of ways to pretend he isn't hurt. "Dad," he said, "I'm sorry. I want to tell you that I said something wise, something Donna would have said, something that wrapped everything up in a bow. What I actually said was, 'I know, son,' because sometimes that's enough, and sometimes it has to be, 'Let me tell you what happened to everybody else,' because you came here for the full story and you deserve it." Tiffany's mother, whose name was Renee, and who I had met exactly once at a dinner where she talked for 45 minutes about her connections in the event industry, was confronted by the vendors who'd been in the kickback arrangement. 2 of them, when they realized they were potentially exposed to fraud liability, got very cooperative very fast. Renee quietly offered to repay a portion of the overcharges. She did not admit wrongdoing. She did, however, stop talking about her connections in the event industry. The venue refunded the $22,000 deposit to Tiffany's mother's card because the contract had been improperly executed. Renee was not pleased about this. She was even less pleased when she realized that the money she'd been counting on for my contribution was not coming. Tiffany, to her credit, and I don't say this easily, handled it with more grace than I expected. She and Derek had a very long and apparently very honest conversation about how their engagement had developed, about influence, about money, about what they actually wanted versus what they'd been guided toward. I know this because Derek told me, in pieces over several calls over the following weeks. They still got married, smaller, much smaller, a vineyard outside of Statesville, about 60 people. Derek called me 3 weeks before the date. "Dad," he said, "I'd like you to come if you want to." I said, "I'll be there." And I won't pretend that the wedding fixed everything. A single day doesn't undo years of slow drift. Derek and I are still finding our way back to each other, which is slower than I'd like and faster than I feared. He calls more now, real calls, not just texts. Last month he drove down to Charlotte and we sat on the porch and watched football and ate bad takeout and didn't talk about any of it for hours, which was, I think, exactly what both of us needed. He told me at one point during halftime, I think I was trying to prove something. Like, if the wedding was big enough, impressive enough, I don't know, like it would mean something. I asked him what he thought it would mean. He was quiet for a while. Then he said that I was worth it, that Mom would have been proud. And there it was, the real thing, underneath all the invoices and spreadsheets and Tiffany's mother's referral fees. A kid who lost his mother at 19 and spent the next 11 years trying to feel like enough. Not so different from a father who kept a porch light on and a chair in the corner just to feel like someone was still in the room. I told him Donna would have been proud. I told him she already was. He didn't say anything to that. He just nodded and looked at the TV, which is the way men say thank you when they don't have the words. And the $231,000? Not a single dollar of it was ever paid. The invoice sits in my files. Patricia kept a copy too. It's the most expensive piece of paper I never spent a dime on. What I did spend money on was a weekend in Asheville, just me, a nice hotel, good bourbon, and long walks in the mountains. About a month after all of this was over, I sat on a trail overlooking the Blue Ridge, and I thought about Gerald's words. There's a difference between a father who gives and a father who's taken from. I've been both. The trick, I think, is learning which one you're being before it costs you everything. I also refilled the bird feeder. Small things matter. Here is the last thing I want to say to every person who has ever given without being asked, who has ever held the door open for someone who walked through it without looking back. You are not a resource. You are not a funding source. You are not a line item on somebody's spreadsheet. You are a person. And the moment someone starts treating your love like a budget allocation, that's the moment you are allowed to pick up the phone, talk to your attorney, call your friend with connections, and let the whole brittle structure come down on its own weight. You don't have to yell. You don't have to threaten. You don't have to send a dramatic letter or show up at a venue in Asheville with a cease and desist. You just have to know your worth, and then very quietly act accordingly. My name is Robert Callahan. I am 61 years old. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I have a porch light that stays on, a chair in the corner of my living room, and a son who calls on Sundays now. That's not everything, but it's enough. Thank you for listening to the end. If this story stayed with you, if something in it felt true, please subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it. These stories don't tell themselves. They need people willing to pass them on. Until next time.